The very first module we're looking at is called Understanding Worldviews, Understanding Worldviews. So just as a doctor or a dentist, there's no treatment without diagnosis. You must first understand what the medical problem is. In the same way, we cannot do evangelism or apologetics effectively unless we understand the people we're trying to talk to and understand where they're coming from, what their assumptions are, what they believe before they begin to consider Christianity. And so what is a worldview? And there's a very fancy German word to describe it that I won't try and pronounce because German is not a language I know very well. But a worldview is the overall perspective from which one sees and interprets the world. It's if you like, I'm wearing a pair of glasses here. I look at the world through my glasses, and the worldview represents the glasses through which we see the world. It's a whole collection of beliefs that we have already about life, about the meaning of life, about the beginning and end, about what human beings are, about what God is, whether he exists or not, and if he is, whether he's personal or impersonal or knowable. So there's a whole collection of beliefs about life and the universe, which are held either by an individual or a group. And there have been times in history when in certain countries and civilizations, everybody has had exactly the same worldview as everyone else in that society. But increasingly now, we live in a global village, in a world where there are lots of different worldviews and where every culture is, in a sense, multicultural because there are people with different worldviews who make up this culture. We see this at the moment with the US election, which is at this moment going right down to the wire. Who will win? Will it be Trump or Biden? And we hear about America being divided into two very, very different countries, people with different beliefs, different convictions, different ideas about what is right or wrong and what the country needs, and different views on everything, whether it is the economy or crime or racism or how to deal with COVID and so on. So it's a collection of beliefs about life in the universe held by an individual or by a group of people. And you must appreciate that the worldview determines everything else in a person's life. So this is a picture of an iceberg, or it's meant to be. So this is an iceberg floating in the ocean, and we know that icebergs, most of what they consist of is below the surface of the water. Only 10% of an iceberg floats above. Everything else is below. So all you can see that's visible is what's above the water. You can't see what's below. If you want to use an African illustration, well, think of a hippopotamus. If you see a hippopotamus in a lake, then all you see are its ears and the top of its snout, but you know that there's a huge amount of hippopotamus below the water that you can't see. And so when we think of a person, what we observe is their behavior. We observe the things they do, and we observe the things they say. But beneath the surface that we don't see unless they reveal it to us, first of all, a worldview, a set of beliefs or assumptions about the world and everything in it. Does God exist? Is death the end? Are human beings just clever monkeys or something more than that? So the worldview is the first thing. And then the worldview determines the beliefs that this person has about the purpose of life, about what's right and wrong, about the way one should live, and so on. And then those beliefs determine the values that the person holds, what's good and right. If you think of the West at the moment, think of the US election going on, and there are many people in America who passionately believe that it is a woman's right to have an abortion, that it should be the woman who chooses. And then there are other people who passionately believe that no, the fetus is a human being with rights, and it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. So these people have quite different values about what they think is right and wrong. And then above the surface is the behavior, the things people say and the things that they do. Now, if you want to work out a medical or dental diagnosis, then of course you have to take a history, you ask certain questions, and you carry out an examination. And you don't jump to conclusions before you know the answers to those questions. And in the same way, if you want to find out a person's worldview, you can do it by asking them a number of questions about what they believe. And these 6 main questions are the questions that determine a worldview. And so the first one, what is God? The theology question. Does God exist or doesn't he? Is he knowable? Is he part of nature or outside nature? Did he create, or is he just part of the whole totality of being? What is God? And then the second question, what are human beings? Are they just complex chemical reactions? Are they like gods, godlike creatures? Are they just animals? Are they just the product of matter, chance, and time? Or were they created? What's the best way to discover truth? Do we do it through the scientific method? Do we do it through reading and studying scriptures? Do we do it by listening to prophets or wise people? What's the best way? The epistemology question. And then the values question or the ethics question. Ethics is next. The values question is about, why do humans have significance? Do they? Are they just like any other animal? Are they therefore disposable? Could you kill them through abortion or euthanasia? Does it matter when young people die from an infectious disease? Do we have value? And if so, why do we have it? Is it because we're the most highly evolved form of life on the planet? Or is it because we're made by God for a relationship with him? Why? And then how do we decide what's right and wrong? The ethical question. What's our basis of values that helps us to come to that question? And then finally, the question, what happens to a person at death? Is death the end of existence? Or is death a pathway to some kind of other existence, maybe as a spirit existing in an afterworld? Or is death the pathway to reincarnation? Is it the pathway to coming back into this world as another person or perhaps another kind of thing? Or is death the pathway to judgment, where we meet God and he puts us into one of 2 places, either heaven or hell? So these are the 6 questions that determine a worldview. And of course, unless you understand what a person's worldview is, it's very difficult to lead them from the place that they're in to the place that you want to help them to go in terms of knowing God. Now, we can classify worldviews on the basis of these questions into 4 main groups. The first group is what we call the pantheism group, the pantheistic group. And this is the typical worldview held by people from backgrounds such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and also the New Age movement, as we've seen it in the West. And we'll come back and look at each of these in more detail shortly. The second worldview, which is less common these days, is that of polytheism. This is the idea that there are lots of different gods to whom we can relate. Now, polytheism was very common in ancient times. We still see it now in followers of tribal religion or animists, or some people who follow folk religion who might belong to one of the big religions but believe there are lots of different gods to appease. Or what we even see that in pantheism as well, within Hinduism, there are elements of polytheism, lots of different gods you can relate to. But polytheism was particularly common in the ancient civilizations. So if we look at those civilizations that interacted with Israel in the pages of the Old Testament, we see, for example, the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Greeks, or of course the Romans or the Egyptians. They all had belief in a whole lot of gods. There wasn't just one God, but a whole lot. There might have been some that were higher than others. That's polytheism. And then the third category is what we call theism, the belief in one God, usually a God who created the whole world and communicates clearly in ways we can understand. And there are three main religions which would hold to theism. Of course, Christianity, we are all Christian theists. But Islam, of course, also believes in one God who is the creator and the judge and who speaks through prophets and scriptures. And of course, Judaism as well. There are only 12 million Jews in the world, but Christianity developed out of Judaism. And there are lots of close similarities between Judaism and Christianity, as we would expect. All the 12 disciples were Jews. Jesus was a Jew. And the New Testament is built on the foundation of the Old Testament. And then finally, atheism. So the belief that there is no God at all, that we are alone in the universe. In fact, that there's no spiritual realm, no such thing as angels, no gods of any description, that human beings are actually the highest form of life in the whole, certainly on the planet and probably in the whole universe. And there are different shades of atheism: naturalism, existentialism, nihilism. And of course, in the ancient world, atheism didn't exist at all. Everyone was either a pantheist, a polytheist, or a theist. But now atheism is very common, especially in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and in the former communist world as well, in China, Russia, and so on. So those are the four major worldviews. Now, let's just consider these in terms of how they answer these 6 questions that we've looked at, because you can see that they're all very different. So the first column here is theism, so Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And of course, all of us believe, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, in a personal supreme being. We believe that human beings are created by God, that truth is what's revealed by God, and that God decides and determines what truth is, that human beings have value because they're created by God, and that what's right and wrong is decided by what is in line with God's nature, and in particular with what is revealed by God through the scriptures, through the prophets, and so on. And death, well, it leads to judgment, and either heaven or hell. So all of those elements you see to a greater or lesser extent in all the theistic religions, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Judaism, or the various sects and cults that branch off from them. So, for example, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses would be in this theistic category as well, because they came out of Christianity. The second category, polytheism, believe in multiple gods, but often also a belief in a high God, a God who's over all, but this high God might not be contactable, might not communicate with them. But in many polytheistic cultures, there is this belief that there was originally one very high God. Human beings are lower rational beings, lower than the gods, lower than the angels. Truth is grounded in tradition and it's passed on, and often ancestor worship plays a very important part in polytheistic religions. And your value comes from your place in the hierarchy. If you're a human being, you're much lower than gods, but higher than animals. And morality, it often boils down to a struggle between the gods to see who is the strongest. And what happens at death? Well, it's not the end of existence, but you enter into the spirit world. And you live in that spirit world. Where I come from in New Zealand, the indigenous people, the Maori, very much held to a polytheistic worldview before Christianity arrived, when of course many of them were converted and became Christian believers. But they believe that when a person dies, their spirit, which you can't see, then migrates the length of the country and leaves off the north of the country into the sea. And then pantheism, remember this is Hinduism, Buddhism, New Age, and so on, that God is not a personal being, but an impersonal life force. and we're all part of God. I'm God, you're God, the trees are part of God, the animals, the whole planet, and so on. We're all part of the totality of being, and there's nothing outside this, very different from theism, where God stands outside creation and separate from it. Truth is subjective. You can feel it intuitively, or you can discover it through meditation or various religious practices, maybe in the New Age movement from crystals and various other means. The value of a human being is because we're part of this whole God, this whole Brahman, this whole totality of being. Morality, what feels natural, and death. Very striking here that in the pantheistic worldview, death leads to reincarnation. So you are come back into this world, and you go through a cycle of birth and rebirth, entering into the world on the basis of choices and actions that you've made in this life. That's the accumulation of karma, which enables you to come back in a better situation. And then atheism, God doesn't exist. Human beings are just clever monkeys. Truth is something you discover through the scientific method only. Of course, as Christian doctors and dentists, we believe that the scientific method is a way of discovering truth, but we also believe God reveals truth through the scriptures, through the prophets. That our value and morality is arbitrary. In many ways, you can choose what you want to believe about what's right and wrong. And death, it's the end. So it leads on to nothing at all. Death is the end of existence. Now, how are worldviews distributed? If we look at the world, this is the percentages roughly: 13% atheist, 20% pantheist, although as we've said already, a lot of those will be polytheistic in practice, 11% polytheist, and 56% theist, because a quarter of the world's population will call themselves Christian and a fifth will call themselves Muslims. Medical students, well, in every country it's different, but in Britain, I can tell you this is the makeup: 65% atheist, 5% pantheist, about 30% theist. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us there are at least 4 different worldviews, that all of them are held by intelligent and well-educated people. If you go to a medical school or dental school in any country, you'll find that the worldview distribution is different because it's determined very much by the culture of the country. They are mutually exclusive. In other words, they believe things which are mutually contradictory. So God can't both exist and not exist. Death can't both be the end and lead to reincarnation. And so we know that no more than one of them can be true. And we can conclude from that that many intelligent people in the world hold to a worldview that is not actually true, a worldview that's not actually true.